class gets started. We're actually going to start today kind of backwards. We're going to play the Kahoot that we didn't have time to play on Monday, just as a good review of neurons and signaling and all that. And then we'll do today's stuff. So, rolls going around, 9:30 on the front, 10:30 on the back. Please put the class that you are enrolled in, not the class that you choose to go to. And get out your phones or your computers or however you choose to play Kahoot. Go to kahoot.it and put in that in. Or if you have the Kahoot app, you can just go direct to the Kahoot app. As long as you keep the names appropriate, we should be fine. You can use emojis, you can use nicknames, you can get as creative as you want. There's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of us right now. Is everybody planning on playing? Is anybody not planning on playing? Okay, then I will wait until we have 11 players. So 2 more. One more. All right. Are you ready? Which type of nervous system contains sensory nerves? All right, most of you got it. It's the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is made up of your nerves, right? So sensory nerves, motor nerves, all of it. What about the central nervous system? What's that made up of? Brain and spinal cord. It's encased in bone, right? Skull, spinal cord. Kai's winning it. Which of the following is not a type of glial cell? Almost everybody got it. Epididymis. What's the epididymis? It's where sperm cells are stored for maturation, right? But it looks a lot like a glial cell. Can anybody think of the one that it sounds like? Ependymal. So I was just trying to trick you. Oh, Dawson took the lead. Which of the following ions is negatively charged? That was a pretty fast response. Chlorine, right? Sodium, potassium, and aluminum are all positively charged ions. Also, aluminum is not an organic ion, so you hopefully don't have any of that in you. But it is still positively charged. So chlorine was the only negative one. The sodium-potassium pump moves blank amount of so many of what in and so many of what out. So is it 3 in, 2 out, 2 in, 3 out? Is it potassium out, sodium in, sodium out, potassium in? You gotta get the right combo, right? Almost everybody got it. It's 3 sodiums out, 2 potassiums in. Dawson still got the lead, but only barely. Depolarization causes an action potential to move towards positive values, right? A depolarization is going up in that action potential spike. And Kai took the lead back. Electricity travels fastest through vacuum. Travels fastest through a vacuum, then through a gas, then through a liquid, then through a solid. So why do we use solids for wires? Why do we use solids for wires, like metal, if that's the slowest thing that they move through?
Can't build vacuums that are already
Yeah, we can't just turn everything into a vacuum. A true vacuum is not even possible, right? Even space isn't a true vacuum. So why do I bring this up? This is more of a physics question. Why do we care where electricity moves the fastest? For the nodes of Ranvier, right? Between what? Between your myelin sheath, right? What's in the node of Ranvier? Fluid, right? It's your brain, right? Blood, plasma, all the stuff that's in your body, right? So we obviously can't have a vacuum in our brain, and you actually don't want air in your brain. So really your brain is made up of solids and liquids, right? But electricity travels faster through, out of those two, liquids, right? And so the node of Ranvier allows for a brief period of time for the electrical signal to move through the liquid portion of your brain instead of the solid portion, and it speeds it up, right? You guys remember about how much? Yeah, it speeds it up to about 120 meters per second, as compared to unmyelinated axons go about 1 meter per second, which is still pretty dang fast. You know, I'm not even 2 meters tall, so even without myelin, it can still get from my brain to my toes in about 2 seconds. But that's a bit of a long time. Like if I want to curl my toes, I'd have to go curl my toes. 1, 2. Okay, right? So the myelin helps that speed up way, way, way fast, right? And just as a side note, this is just kind of cool. Fiber optics are essentially this idea, and you can send light signals through glass, but it's trapped inside the glass, so it's moving at almost the speed of light. That's why fiber optics are the very best, right? It traps light beams in a near vacuum. So that's how fiber optics work, which I think that's just fun. It has nothing to do with biology at all. All right, Bryant is in the lead. Which neurotransmitter helps with relaxation, right? We talked about 4 of them. Where'd the audio go? It's not fun without the weird music. Almost everybody. GABA, right? So GABA's for relaxation. Glutamate. Not quite. What does glutamate help with? It's a little ironic then because it's memory. Glutamate helps your memory, right? It helps memory storage. Acetylcholine. Muscles, right? And then epinephrine, adrenaline, right? So the fight or flight response, sexual arousal, those types of things that have to do with adrenaline, right? So try and mentally tell yourself epinephrine and adrenaline are the same thing. Epinephrine's the actual scientific term. Adrenaline's really just a sort of a more casual term. Thank you. So like EpiPens, they're called EpiPens because they have epinephrine in them and they can shock you out of shock. Cool beans? Okay, so memorize those 4 and what they're associated with. All right, final question. SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, work by, and it's, never mind, I don't even know what it's saying. Oh, not as many. It decreases reuptake. Because think about it. It's a reuptake inhibitor, so it decreases reuptake, right? So where do we actually see SSRIs working? In synapses, right? Why do we use SSRIs? You can use it as an antidepressant, right? How does that work? Yeah, sometimes people with depression, not in every case, but sometimes it's that their body is either reuptaking the serotonin too fast or isn't able to absorb it fast enough. In either case, the serotonin just needs to hang out in the synapse a little bit longer. So if you take an SSRI, it keeps your neurons from reuptaking, right, the serotonin, and it just kind of hangs out longer. And that gives the next neuron a better chance to absorb it. Therefore, you're not increasing the amount of serotonin in the body, right? You're just increasing reuptake of the existing serotonin. Okay? Up to speed? So that's just a review of Monday/Friday stuff. Now we'll talk about today's stuff. Where am I? So, I didn't prepare slides again, and it's not because I'm like, I just don't want to do it, right? A lot of it's just vocab, which I'm more than happy to go over, but it would have just been, me copying and pasting her slides. So we're just going to use her slides, but we're also just going to leave it open. So we're just going to answer whatever questions you guys have. Doesn't necessarily have to be today's stuff. It can be on anything that's going to be on exam 2, right? Because exam 2 is in like a week and a half. So what do you guys want to talk about? I'm forcing your hand because there are no slides, and you can't assume that I'm just going to talk to you for 40 minutes.
Can we just generally go over the lobes, their function, and like diet, supplement, balance, brainstem, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So, lobes. 4 primary lobes, right? What are they? Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, right? So frontal lobe is in front. Temporal lobe is, I think of like your temples, right? It's on the sides of the brain. The parietal lobe is on top. I think, your parents are older than you, so they're above you. And then the occipital lobe, you just have to remember, is the back. I don't know. If you also know that that's, your eyes are associated with the back of your brain, if you kind of already knew that. If you ever get hit really hard in the back of the head, your vision will like dim, and it's because you would think, eyes are right here, so why shouldn't the brain use it right here? But it's actually the back, right? So vision, back of your head, right? Eyes in the back of your head, I guess you can think about it that way. Occipital lobe, right? So here we see, and it's nice and color-coded for us, each of what they do. Functions. I couldn't think of the word functions. Each of the functions of each of the lobes plus the cerebellum, right? So parietal lobe, higher thinking is the short way of looking at it, right? It's the ability to make judgments and decisions and think critically, right, is the frontal lobe. So we talked about in class someone who had damage to this, right? What was his name? Phineas Gage? You guys remember? Wasn't that it? Yeah. So he was a railroad worker, and they use explosives to drive the rail spikes into the ground, right? You really need those suckers in there, otherwise the train's going to fly off. So they blow them up, and it shoots them into the ground. And something happened weird that, it got flipped up. I don't know how it happened, but it blew up and it went through his head, right? However in the world this is even possible, it didn't actually kill him, and it didn't actually damage anything except the connection between his frontal lobe and the rest of his brain. So his frontal lobe was essentially just turned off. And he was fine. Like, he didn't lose vision, hearing, taste, he was fine. I don't even know what in the world. But what happened as a consequence?
Become really rude.
Yeah.
Angry.
He was a jerk to people. What else?
Make your decision.
Yeah, he was really bad at decision making.
Couldn't hold down a job.
Couldn't hold down a job. He acted animalistic. He would just take a pee in public. People are like, what are you doing? And he's like, I gotta pee. Because his front of his brain, so his hind brain says, you got to pee, right? Hindbrain is for your instincts, and it said, time to pee. Normally, our front brain goes, well, I'm in front of 15 people right now. Probably shouldn't take a pee, right? He didn't have that. So nobody said, this is a bad idea, right? Or being rude to people, right? Our front brain says, you know what? I shouldn't say that, right? That's a really rude, inappropriate, whatever thing to say to somebody. Don't say it. He didn't have that. He had no filter, right? When you say somebody has no filter, this dude literally did not have a filter in his brain, right? Parietal lobe had gotten severed. So if that's an example that helps you remember kind of what the frontal lobe does and what it would do if you didn't have one, there you go. Let's do temporal lobe next. So actually it kind of lines up nicely. Your ears are on the side of your head. Your temporal lobes are for hearing, right? And actually there's kind of an interesting overlap, and I've mentioned it before. The brain has overlaps, right? There's not one area that does exclusive, right? So Broca's area is for speech. Wernicke's area is for understanding speech, right? So people with damage to the Broca's area will have a hard time forming sentences. Not like a stutter, It'll literally be like they can't think of the word. Like I did 2 minutes ago when I couldn't think of, what couldn't I think of? Now I can't think of it. Function, right? So it's something like that, but all the time. They're always going, what's the word? It's on the tip of my, and they just can't do it, right? They can't form sentences. Wernicke's area, they have a hard time understanding. So you know how somebody says something, and you're like, what? And they say it again, you're like, what? They say it again, you're like, I'll just laugh and assume it wasn't a question. I don't know, right? Because you're like, what? All the time. If you have damage to your Wernicke's area, you're just constantly like, I can't take the words that you're saying and make sense out of them, right? So the way I remember this is Broca's area is broken speech, right? You would speak brokenly, if that's a word. And then Wernicke's area, I just remember, is the other way around. It's the opposite. You can't speak. There's not really, I don't know. I don't have anything for that one. But those are important ones to remember. I guess I kind of skipped over, but they're more or less self-explanatory. Prefrontal cortex is that higher thinking. The sort of the back of the frontal lobe is the motor control, but it's like fine motor control. So it's not, punches and kicks. It's like writing and typing is the frontal lobe, stuff that, animals can't do. It's that kind of motor function. Because then other motor function will be in your cerebellum, right? But that's like walking and eating and basic stuff. So yeah, auditory cortex for hearing, Wernicke's area for understanding speech, which again is a type of hearing, right? But it's processing what you hear. We'll do parietal lobe. So you have the somatosensory cortex, and that's just understanding the things that you touch, right? So this is a little cold. This is really smooth. Feeling, my shoes are a little uncomfortable. My jacket's kind of heavy. Everything that you sense, it's bright in this room. Parker's voice is too loud, is all somatosensory cortex.
Do you know if emotions come from the parietal lobe, or?
Emotional response is a really tricky one because it doesn't necessarily have a single area, which I guess, again, the brain. But response, they've traced a lot of response to emotional, so not I guess kind of emotional response. I don't know how to phrase it. Deciding how to respond to an emotional stimulus, a lot of that is frontal cortex. So somebody punches you in the face, your frontal lobe goes, do I punch them back? Do I cry? Do I run away? But also that'll be part of other parts of your brain that say, I just got attacked. And your hindbrain takes over, lots of adrenaline, and you go, do I fight? Do I run? So it's kind of both, because your prefrontal cortex goes, what's the best decision? Your hindbrain and things like that go, what's the safest decision? So kind of all over, I guess. And that's the worst, but that's brains for you. Brains are called quantum computers. That's why my announcement said biological quantum computers, question mark, right? A quantum computer is just a computer that can make decisions, right, based on anything, right? And so this is the only biological quantum computer is a brain, and it makes choices. But that's a pretty complex process, so you'll never be able to pin down and say, okay, right here, that's, you know, how you decide whether or not to cry, right? But we generalize stuff and it works. Oh, the tip of this stylus just fell out. Well, wait, I think I found it, no freaking way. This tiny little black thing on the black carpet. What are the odds? Plus I'm colorblind. You guys should be astounded. I never find stuff that I drop. I'll drop stuff on the counter and I'll be like, where'd it go? My wife's like, right there. And I'm like, I literally don't see it because it's the same color as the counter. It's always a hoot. So again, sensory association cortex is integrating the sensory information. So I kind of lied. Somatosensory cortex is just touch. I started to get into when I started saying like it's bright and it's loud, right? So that's kind of just integrating the rest of your senses. So somatosensory specifically touch. Soma means body, so if that helps you to think, you know, it's just what your body touches. And then sensory association is all of it. You know, it's too warm in here, I'm uncomfortable, it's loud, it's quiet, my head itches, whatever, right? That's your brain's way of interpreting the sensory world. Okay, and then we have the occipital lobe, which is all vision, right? Visual association cortex is how you see something and go, I know what that is, right? You see this and your brain immediately says, that's a stylus. You see a friend and you immediately say, that's my friend Todd, I don't know, right? You see things and you recognize them, okay? The visual cortex itself is just processing the information. So not so much recognition. I know it's kind of a gray area overlap, but it's not so much recognition so much as just knowing where stuff is and being able to say, okay, that's what this is, right? So you guys have heard that your brain flips everything you see, right? It's because the lens in your eye, the convex lens, right? That flips images. So the world's obviously right side up, right? But it hits your eye and it gets flipped upside down and magnified by your eye. Then your visual cortex sets it right side back up, right? Which sounds weird because nothing's upside down, but it's just your brain's way of aligning images with reality, right? Otherwise, we'd walk around and gravity wouldn't make sense because everything would look like it's pointing the wrong direction, right? So it's just your brain's way of saying, this is how it's supposed to be, right? So that's one of the main functions of the visual cortex. And then I've said it a bunch of times, but the cerebellum is, you know, balance and coordination and basic functions. And then obviously, you know, your hind brain for like your heartbeat and breathing and some of those just autonomic functions that we don't even think about. Okay? Cool beans on brain lobes. Do you guys have questions on any of that? Pretty much everything I just said is worth memorizing and knowing really well. Like you ought to be able to get up here and do what I just did if you want to do well on a test. So if you can get up here and you can explain everything on that slide, you're in good shape. Okay? All right, what else are we talking about?
She's gonna, give us different brains and then have to match the brain to the organism?
I can't say because I didn't take the class from her. Pretty much whenever I've taken, when I took the class, there weren't so much images as just words. So it would say the prefrontal cortex is associated with higher thinking, right? Or the occipital lobe is located back of the brain, that kind of stuff. So know where they are, and then you're good. Because if it shows a picture, then you can just point at it. And if it says, where's the parietal lobe, then you still know it's on the top, right? So that's probably the safest way to play it, is know where they are located in general, and then you should be in good shape.
What about the other species, like rats?
Oh yeah, she did like a, is that this one? Yeah. I would be really surprised if she said, like, where do you find the visual cortex in a rat? I just don't see that happening. But again, I didn't take it from Dr. Bobek. I'm having the hardest time today. I didn't take it from Dr. Bobek, so like I make no promises, but that to me just does not seem like a test-worthy type thing for her to say, like, where's a cat's sensory motor cortex? But yeah. I would focus on other stuff, and then if you're like, man, I have all this extra free time to study, which no one ever does, but then, maybe move on to that. If you're like, wow, I'm totally confident in all the important stuff, I guess that's some good secondary information. What else? Doesn't necessarily have to be today's stuff. If you're still stuck on something from neurons or please not development. No, just kidding.
So she briefly mentioned the diencephalon. We need to know, like, the proencephalon and everything else, or just that?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. It was on a slide, wasn't it?
Slide
15?
15.
Oh. It's tricky because you have to know what those are and what they do. So in that sense, you have to know what the diencephalon is, if that makes sense. She did go over these, didn't she? And what their function is. Again, it's pretty much a vocab thing, so it wouldn't be too hard to just straight up Google function of thalamus, function of pineal gland, function of hypothalamus, and then just kind of make some flashcards or something and just familiarize yourself with the 4 functions associated with each of those. Well, so the 1 function associated with each of those 4, and then know that that makes up the diencephalon. Make sense? Okay. What else?
So she did mention in class, like, there were certain, like, senses that we have that don't go straight to the brain. They just kind of only circulate on the nervous system, which is between kind of like ENS. What she was talking about with that.
Yeah, was there a slide for that one?
Like the reflexes? Yeah, kind of reflex.
Well, there's like this one. There's definitely crossover here, because what's gray and white matter?
It's the butterfly and white, it's just everything on the side.
Yeah, it's your brain, right? So I'm trying to think, because I can't remember if she had a slide on that or not, or if that was just something she mentioned. Do you remember a specific slide associated with it? More just something she mentioned. The example I can think of off the top of my head is smell. Technically has its own area of the brain that is only smell. It's the olfactory bulb. And smell goes in your nose, straight to the olfactory bulb, and gets processed. And it doesn't cross over to anywhere else, right? I mean, and you can never say that with the brain. It's associated with memory, so it associates with the hippocampus as well. But sense of smell itself, straight to the olfactory bulb. So that's the one I can think of off the top of my head. Do you remember any other examples she might have given? then as far as that, then maybe you just really need to know that there are some senses that aren't always straight to the brain. Sometimes they stay localized. If you didn't give specific examples, you won't be tested on specific examples. You may not even be tested on that information at all. So that's the best I can do there, sorry. What else you got? We still got 20 minutes. It's gonna be a long 20 minutes. This is the perfect way to find out what you don't know, right? Because most of the time I'm like, I don't even know what I don't know till I look at my notes and things like that and go, okay, I have no idea what this actually means, right? So maybe look through the PowerPoints or whatever and try and see if you could explain that concept, and if you can't, that's something you should ask about.
You just describe the difference between afferent and
Yes, and there should be a slide pretty early on for that one. Oh, it's right here. So, afferent versus efferent, or efferent. Afferent and efferent. I say efferent because it's so dang close to afferent. It's like affect and effect. Does anybody know the difference between affect with an A and effect with an E?
past, like how something.
One's a noun, one's a verb. Affect with an A is a verb, right? I'm going to affect you, right? But effect is a noun. You know, it had a strong effect on him, right? So next time you're texting somebody, you'll be like, oh wait, I really want to say affect instead of effect. Or when you watch How I Met Your Mother and Marshall is obsessed with the difference between affect and effect, that's actually why I learned it, because I was like, I don't get it. And I went and Googled it, and I was like, oh, it's a pretty stupid thing to be obsessed with the difference over. But it does help you in this sense. If you know the difference between affect and effect, you know the difference between afferent and efferent. Afferent neurons, right, carry out, no, how do I want to say this? So afferent neurons are the sensory neurons. They're the ones picking up the information, right? The ones picking up the affect of the environment, right? They're the ones being affected, right? So when I put my hand on the table and I feel the table and it's room temperature, I don't know, and smooth, right? My sensory neurons are being affected by it, right? But then your efferent neurons carry out an effect. So I put my hand on a hot stove, afferent neurons are affected, and they say, that's hot. Efferent neurons carry out the effect of going, take your hand off, right? So, I'm trying to think of other examples. They're all like hot and cold examples. But it works with all your senses. So, you see a car coming at you, right? The affect would be getting hit by the car, right? So your sensory neurons go, that car is going to hit me. Your efferent neurons, your motor neurons go, you should probably move, right? So afferent neurons sense it, efferent neurons then do whatever makes the most sense based on that. Move out of the way of a car, let go of a hot object, jump over an obstacle. I don't know, right? It's just what you do. When you see something, you do something. See something, say something, right? So you see something, you say something. However you want to remember it. I remember it with affect, effect. If you want to make up your own, whatever.
What's the enteric nervous system again?
Enteric nervous system. Anybody remember?
Like the digestive system.
Yeah. So Your autonomic nervous system, what's that do?
It's like automatic in your body.
Stuff you don't even think about. Heartbeat, breathing, digestion, that kind of thing, right? So your autonomic nervous system is automatic. It divides into the sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? So your sympathetic nervous system speeds stuff up. So it increases your heart rate, it increases your breathing, it increases your digestion rate after you eat. Your parasympathetic slows it down, right? So after you've run, right, your heart's beating real fast, you start to relax. Your parasympathetic nervous system slows your heart rate, slows your breathing, just is slowing everything down, right? It gets, it calms down your adrenaline and all that. So the enteric, this tip keeps falling out, man. I'm not even going to try this time. The enteric nervous system is still automatic, but it's dedicated exclusively to intestinal function. So I don't know why they specifically separate it from parasympathetic and sympathetic. You just have to know enteric is digestion, which is still all an automatic function, right? I've also been told that digestion's really painful, but your brain just chooses to ignore it. I don't know if that's a fact, but I think that's kind of bizarre, right? Why don't we just not have pain sensors in our stomach? That seems like a much better way to do it. But then again, if you ate something poisonous, you wouldn't know. Now I know why it happened. All right. I solved the puzzle in my head right now. I'm on it. All right. Other questions? While I see if I'm 2 for 2 on finding this stupid thing. I don't know why it falls out. Who designed this? I don't think I'm going to be able to draw without it. Yeah, can't do anything. Anyway, what else you got?
I know she explained in class a couple chapters ago about forming identical twins. How do we have identical twins?
Yeah, so how do you get identical twins and how do you get non-identical or fraternal twins? Let's see if I can find us a good picture on it. So yeah, this will work. Oh, it's super tiny though. So monozygotic means identical, and dizygotic means fraternal or not identical, and it has to do with the zygote, right, and how it divides. So I'll just have to point. So monozygotic, identical twins, one sperm, one egg, forms 2 divisions, and then they each divide into the same placenta. So really it should like loop back into one placenta, right? So this is the zygote, right? But it's monozygotic because it divides back on itself and they share a placenta. And then, they form obviously 2 separate organisms, but out of the same placenta. And that's why they end up identical. They formed from the same sperm. That's why they have the same genes, right? Dizygotic, fraternal, one sperm, one egg, right? So sperm are not identical and eggs are not identical. They're very close. That's why your siblings look alike, right? But they're not identical. They don't have the exact same genetic makeup. So this will form separate placentas and separate genetic makeup. But with identical, you get one sperm, one egg. So really what it boils down to is how many sperm are you looking at? If you had one sperm and one egg, identical. If, in the rare case during ovulation, 2 eggs were to descend into the fallopian tubes, then you get twins. And then it works from there. Triplets, again, is just if 3 eggs descend and get fertilized, 4 eggs, 5 eggs, 6 eggs, 7 eggs, right? And so that's why in humans you hardly ever see beyond like natural twins or triplets, right? So like Octomom, that was not natural. She didn't just have 8 kids, right? They did a fertility treatment. They took, I think they usually take 20 eggs out and fertilize them out of the uterus in a lab, right? And they actually grow a zygote in the lab. Then they take the best few and put them back in. And in Octomom's case, she decided to put 8 back in and got 8 kids, right? I've got a friend, his brothers are triplets, right? And same thing, they took out a bunch of eggs, artificially, well not artificially, but lab fertilized them, artificially fertilized them. And then when the zygotes were forming, they took the best 3, because it's about a 1 in 3 chance, and they put them back in her uterus, and all 3 actually happened to work. She was only shooting for 1 kid. She got 3, so she was like, great. But they all turned out all right. That's actually also where you get stem cells. Not in the United States anymore. You can donate the zygotes that you chose not to put back in utero, and they take the stem cells out of them. I'm pretty sure it's illegal in the United States now, because people were like weirded out by that. They're like, but like it's a growing thing and you're gonna take its stem cells. But then, people are also like, you can kill it at whatever stage. So I don't understand the logic behind like abortion versus like using zygotes for stem cells, but I think that using them for stem cells is illegal. Obviously abortion is legal. We won't get into the politics of people's opinions about abortion, but that's just a fun side science fact for you. You would not be tested on stem cell research. You would be tested on, how you get identical versus fraternal. And you have to know what stem cells are, because that's how gametogenesis works, right? It's from stem cell. All right, what else?
Over anatomical directions.
Yes. You're talking about these anatomical directions?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not what I wanted to do at all. That's what I wanted to do. I can't draw, so where's my pointer stick? So you have 3 sets of directions. Anterior means front, posterior, back, right? The way I remember that is my grandma always tells me to sit on my posterior, right? It's talking about my butt, but because she's a 70-year-old white woman, she can't say the word butt. It's inappropriate. So, rostral caudal, same thing, right? Front, back, back. Okay, dorsal versus ventral. Dorsal, back or top, right? It depends on, if I'm laying flat, then that's my top, right? But so you have to mentally orient stuff, but it essentially means sort of your back your back half, right? So I think dorsal fin on like a shark or a dolphin or a whale, right? Not a whale. Whales don't have those. Dolphins. Dolphins and sharks have dorsal fins, right? And some fish. So dorsal, back. Ventral, I think like ventilation on the bottom, right? You gotta ventilate stuff out. It just means bottom, or like this side. And it doesn't apply to all organisms in every case, right? We have an anterior and a posterior, but like a fish would have like a dorsal and a ventral. And then medial versus lateral. What's medial? Middle, yeah. Medial, middle. It's my mid, just straight down the middle. Lateral, to the sides, right? Left and right. Or whatever makes sense for however the organism is oriented, right? That make sense? To answer your question?
So is like pretty much everything lateral then? Is there like really anything that's just perfectly square?
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about it, like the medial line is a one-dimensional line and nothing exists in one dimension, right? So it's really just more of a directional orientation, right? So if you were to say, we're going to make a medial incision, that's explaining, we're going to make an incision right down the middle. But you don't really have like a medial whatever. You don't have like a medial anything. You have lateral limbs and lateral eyes, but you don't have like a medial. It's just more of a direction. Yeah. And so it works in the 3 dimensions, right? So you can have an anterior, it's the front of your face. The posterior is the back of your face. Lateral is the sides of your head. This medial plane is going like right down the middle of his face. What else have we got? Ventral, right? So down by your brain stem. Dorsal, end of your brain stem versus ventral. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Oh yeah, it does. So think of this more as like laying flat. This is where the dorsal fin would be, and this is where the vents would be, right? That's kind of how I always try and orient this stuff. I lay it flat like a shark, and then I say that's where the dorsal fin would be.
But with the brain, the top is the dorsal and the bottom is the ventral.
Yeah, I don't know if you can really say like the dorsal of your brain. I don't know if that's a specific example, but that's along the right direction. So if you were to say like this is the dorsal end of the brain, that's the ventral end of the brain. I don't know if anyone actually says that, but you're on the right track. That's how they work. So more than anything, you just have to be able to recognize front, back, top, bottom, middle, sides, and then you'd be given maybe an image, maybe just words that would say the back of the head could be considered posterior, right? The underside of a fish could be considered ventral, right? That kind of stuff. Sound good? Guys all right with directions? Okay. Got time for one more question. Make it a good one. Now you're nervous because it has to be a good one, right? There are no stupid questions. There are just easy questions and questions about development. I'm not going to lie, when she pulled that up in class, I was like, what? I didn't learn this. So, I did learn this. I'm a little more confident.
Could you do like a Reader's Digest review of hormones?
Yes. Hormones are lipids. That's the Reader's Digest. That's not in this one, is it? You're talking about from development?
In development?
Or are you talking about the ones like from the thyroid and things like that? Because there's a lot of hormones. I don't think there's any specific hormones on here.
Yeah, like during, like female versus male, and during ovulation, when things come in.
Oh, so you're looking at that graph, if I'm thinking of the same one, with all the spikes, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, yeah. And just while I'm thinking about it, because I saw the slide, you guys remember the term long-term potentiation from class today? Oh boy, we're going to talk about that on Monday. That is a very conceptually deep question that I remember having like a lot of test questions on. So, somebody make a note, because if I don't talk about it on Monday, I want someone to say, hey, you're supposed to talk about long-term potentiation. I could have sworn it was here. Did I pass it while I was distracted by talking?
Is it in reproduction?
Maybe it's in reproduction. Yeah, that makes more sense. Okay. Come on. So yeah, don't let me forget to talk about long-term potentiation. It's very important. I probably should have already talked about it, but I only remembered because I saw the slide 2 seconds ago. So we got a bunch of hormones involved in ovulation, menstruation, and, in the long run, fertilization, right? So first off, estradiol, what's it doing?
Signaling that it's got a mature egg and it's ready to be ovulated.
Yes, so we've been developing our follicle, and estradiol peaks as the follicle reaches full maturation. That tells the body time to ovulate, right? And essentially eject the egg from the ovary into the fallopian tube, right? Then the corpus luteum, which is sort of that area where the egg was being stored, will break down, right? The progesterone is what's deciding the corpus luteum degradation, right? So progesterone spikes as the corpus luteum forms and then dips as it disintegrates. What happens if you are pregnant? It never drops. It'll just stay steady, right? What else does progesterone relate to? Menstruation and the thickness of uterine lining, right? So notice how right about here progesterone starts to peak. Right about there is when uterine lining starts to get its thickest, right? And then progesterone will peak, and as it drops, then uterine lining thins out, and that is menstruation, right? But again, if you get pregnant, progesterone stays steady, uterine lining stays steady, because that's where the egg's implanted, right? So you have to have that uterine lining. We're already out of time. So luteinizing hormone is what is ejecting. Luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone are both involved in that ovulation. The follicle stimulating hormone is what's telling the follicle time to ovulate, time to send out the egg. And the luteinizing hormone is the one telling it time to turn into the corpus luteum. Okay? So that's the Reader's Digest version. There will obviously be more sessions and super sessions, so if that's still something you guys want to talk more about, we can make that happen. You can email me, we can do whatever. But that's our time for today. Thank you for coming. If you didn't sign the roll, it's up front here.